saying, the duration of this info session will be 2 hours. It will include a series of presentations, and then we will have 3 rounds of questions and answers. The questions can be asked directly through the screen in front of you, through the link we've shared via individual email. You can also, so we are using Slido.com. So basically you are sharing your question. We will be selecting the question and sharing it with the policy officers to answer. This info session will be recorded, and we will share with you the link right afterwards, together with the PowerPoint presentation that will be used today. We will have introductory remarks by the chair of the session, Vicente Hurtado, head of unit of the Digitax unit in charge of CBAM, energy and green taxation. Welcome, Vicente, thank you very much. We will have a presentation by Maxime Monleon on the role of national competence authorities and declarants, followed by a presentation of Germán de Melo Ponce on inward processing. Then we will have a first round of questions and answers. Do not hesitate to share your questions via the chat option in your screen or via slido.com using the hashtag CBAM. We kindly remind you that there is a quite comprehensive frequently asked questions document, so we would please ask you to check first whether the answer to your question is already answered there, so we can focus on questions that are not already answered. Then we will have a presentation by Katarina Franke and Leander Krager on the registry and its functionalities. We will have a second round of questions, and then Theo Gatterer will complete the series of presentations focusing on the legislative developments and the future of the CBAM regulation. If you have any technical issue, you can always write us at the CBAM campaign email address that has been in contact with you, and we will try to answer along the session. Without further ado, I'll give the floor to the chair, Vicente Hurtado, for the first introductory remarks. The floor is yours, Vicente. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone, and thanks a lot for organizing this event. We thought it was already high time to organize another webinar in English for a big audience. I'm happy to say that today we are more than 5,000 people in the call, which is, of course, very satisfactory for us, because what we tend to do with this type of webinars, of course, is to reach out to the largest possible audience in order to make sure that we all understand CBAM, and also we can help you to answer your questions. As David was saying before, this is supposed to be an interactive session. You will have also the chance to put your questions, and we'll do our best here with the team which is around the table. As you can see, I'm surrounded by a large number of colleagues who will be also presenting today the different aspects. I will make a short introduction only for those who are discovering CBAM. I don't think this is the case of most of the people in the audience, so no worries, because of course the objective of the session of today is to be more practical and to really go through the transitional period to help you struggle with the implementation of the CBAM, to learn. As we have said very often, this transitional period is a learning curve for everyone. Also for us, we are listening to you, we are also fine-tuning the system, and this is what we want to do from now until the end of 2025. So this is also why these webinars are very important for us, also to take the temperature of you who are practically applying the CBAM, who have to comply with the obligations and who have to submit the reports, and therefore for us it's really very important. Maybe at the end of the session, or not maybe, at the end of the session, we will also talk a bit about next steps and what we are doing now, from now until the end of the transitional period, so that we will give you also an opportunity to understand better. And of course, we are always open to receive your suggestions, your points of view, or your comments on the implementation of the CBAM, and of course you can send your emails to our through our website or to our email address. With that, very, very short, I will just remind very quickly why the CBAM was introduced, the objectives, and a bit about the scope. So on the next slide, Alina? We have a problem with the slides. Well, I was going to say that they are coming. So on the next slide, we can see that the Fit for 55 package was adopted in July 2021 by the Commission, which was the legislative package for the implementation of the European Green Deal, included a new measure, which is the CBAM. And the CBAM comes as a complement to our EU emission trading system. Very often we say that is the way to deal with to face the risk of carbon leakage because of the high level of ambition in the EU, but at the same time it's a complement also of the EU ETS because it will be replacing over time from 2026 to 2034 the free allowances in the CBAM sectors. I have to say that in any case the free allowances are being phased out. As you know, in the EU ETS it's a cap system, a cap and trade system. So we are reducing the cap or the total of emissions in order to achieve our targets and the ambitious target by 2050 to become net zero neutrality. And in order to do that, of course, we need to phase out the free allowances. So the CBAM, as we will see later on, will be also introduced gradually. First, because we have this transitional period from last October until the end of 2025, sorry, but also because as long as the free allowances will be in the system, the CBAM will also be gradually introduced. The Fit for 55 package means that the objective of the EU by 2030 is to reduce emissions by 55% at least, but already we have announced an objective for 2040, which is the new target of 90% reduction, 90% reduction. This was in a communication by the Commission at the beginning of springtime. Of course, that needs to be discussed with Council and Parliament, and that will be reflected possibly by the end of next year in new amendments to the legislation. We know that this transition has to be socially just. This is why also the European Green Deal and the Fit for 55 package introduced a new social climate fund. On the next slide, we can see a bit what I was saying before about what are the objectives with the introduction of the CBAM. And the risk of carbon leakage arises when, because of this different stringency in climate policies, there might be an incentive to produce goods outside the EU, overseas, in order to take advantage of a less stringent climate policy. Let's not forget that many countries around the world do not have any MRV systems in place. They do not have, of course, carbon pricing, or even if they have, their carbon pricing is very low, and that, of course, does not give a right incentive to decarbonize. This is why there is this possible risk of carbon leakage. So far, it has been dealt with the existence of the free allowances, but as the free allowances will be gone, of course, then there will be a higher incentive to produce, or there might be a higher incentive to produce outside. What is important also to say is that what we want is to promote importation of green products. That's very important, and this is why we see the CBAM as a measure to foster, of course, the decarbonization. Also, the introduction of carbon price. Let's be clear, we are not introducing any restrictions or obligations of the countries, how to decarbonize, how fast, in which sectors, and also to introduce carbon price. But what we can see, of course, since the announcement of the CBAM, is the CBAM can be a great opportunity to introduce MRV, to introduce carbon pricing, and of course, to increase the reduction of emissions in those countries. Finally, I would just like to say that with the CBAM, we are not targeting countries, we are targeting companies, because we know that everywhere, like in the EU, there are good producers and less good producers, or those who are doing an effort to transform their industry to decarbonize, while, for example, we know that others are lagging behind. As you can see on the next slide, how we do that is by introducing a CBAM which mirrors completely the EU ETS, or as much as possible. I mentioned that the EU ETS is a cap and trade system, and the big difference with the CBAM is that we don't cap emissions with the CBAM, because that would be something equivalent to say that we are limiting the number of imports, and we don't want to do that. CBAM is an environmental measure, it's not a trade or a competitiveness measure. That has to be very clear. And what we also the other difference with the EU ETS is that there is no trade system. The price will be the same, so the basis will be the actual or the real data, the actual emissions embedded in the imported goods, like if they would have been produced in the European Union, and the carbon price will be the same. There will be a weekly price set by the auctioning in the EU ETS, which will be also the reference for the CBAM certificate that can be bought along the year by the importers. So just to say that the same price on the same basis. The difference is that in the EU ETS, there is the possibility for a secondary market to trade the excessive ETS certificates. So companies can sell those certificates among themselves, while, for example, in the CBAM, we do not allow for that. Importers will be able to buy the certificates at the same price along the year, and then they have to use those certificates to cover the emissions of the imported goods by themselves. They can, of course, internally assign those certificates to one good or to another, depending on the carbon intensity, but only in the case that those certificates have not been used for 2 years. There is a timing, or there is a possibility to use the certificates for 2 years. Then the certificates can be up to 1/3 of the total certificates can be repurchased by the member states and the European Commission, in order to cover an overestimation of the number of certificates. Finally, if a carbon price has been paid at the source, that carbon price can be deducted from the CBAM adjustment. Of course, that carbon price has to be effectively paid, not rebated, not reimbursed. And there has been, now we are working, and we will come to that at the end of this webinar today, and we are working on how this carbon price can be assigned to goods, who has to certify that carbon price, and then of course also how this carbon price can be transformed into the number of certificates that do not need to be bought. But all that will be from 2026, because until 2025, as you know, we are still in the transitional period. You know the sectors. You know these sectors have been selected taking into account their carbon intensity, so high carbon intensity, in particular cement, iron, steel, aluminum, and fertilizers, and also because these are goods which are very highly traded. Electricity and hydrogen were added because even if we don't have importations of hydrogen at this moment, but they are coming, and very, very few importations of electricity. As you know, the European Union has launched a big campaign or objective strategy to reduce more and more the dependency on the fossil fuels. Of course, this is part of the Fit for 55 and part of the European Green Deal objectives. And therefore, we want to rely more and more on electricity and on hydrogen. And also, we know that part of this electricity and this hydrogen will have to come from outside. What we want to make sure, of course, with the CBAM applying to these sectors, is that we also promote the decarbonization of the two sectors, and that we import green electricity and green hydrogen. From now and until the end of the transitional period, we will be discussing about the possibility of extending the scope, not only to other sectors, chemicals, for example, or polymers were mentioned, but also to other downstream goods. What I want to say is that, in any case, of course, those sectors have to be part of the ETS and at the risk of carbon leakage. So no discussion about, for example, textiles or agriculture products, at least as long as they are not part of the ETS. And we are also discussing about the impact of the introduction of CBAM on the downstream goods. I will give you an example. What happens if by introducing the CBAM on the importation of steel, so what happens with, of course, the importations of other goods intensive in steel, like could be the case of cars or refrigerators. So that's something that we are analyzing. We analyzed in 2021, we came to the conclusion that at least by 2030, the impact would be not important, but that's something that we are looking at now also carefully. The timeline, you can see on the screen, it started in October 23 with this transitional period, and it will last until the end of 2025. By the end of 2025, the Commission will do, or at least by the end of 2025, the Commission will do a report to the European Council and the European Parliament. As you know, we had elections recently, so we will need to see with new Parliament, but also with Member States and with the new Commission, how we want to move forward in terms of, for example, expanding the scope, but also we will need to look at other technical issues like what happens with indirect emissions. As you will see today, indirect emissions only apply for the moment to cement and fertilizers, although we are asking to collect data for all sectors because we are analyzing the possibility of extending also to the rest of the sectors. And also we want to analyze issues like impact on developing an LDCs, but also, for example, how to take into account international climate discussions. As you know, OECD, but also G7, G20, the Climate Club, which has been recently set up, are looking at methodologies, but also looking at how to mitigate carbon emissions, but also the risk of carbon leakage. So all this has to be taken into account. Also, other countries like the UK and Australia have announced or have launched a public consultation on possible introduction of their CBAMs. So that's something, of course, that we will need to analyze. I have to say, and I would like to underline that of course, all we are doing is with a vocation to contribute to the reduction of emissions. I always say that the best CBAM would be the CBAM that doesn't need to be applied. For us, of course, the best scenario is that the whole world is decarbonizing, reducing emissions quickly, that everyone engages to a 2050 net zero neutrality or net carbon neutrality objective as soon as possible. But as long as we don't get there, we think that CBAM can be an important environmental tool to contribute to promote decarbonization. Finally, from 2026, the introduction will be gradual, as I said before, because there will be a phase-in of the CBAM, while the free allowances for the EU ETS sectors in the scope of the CBAM will also be phased out by 2034. Very briefly on the transitional period, it started with the last quarter of 2023, and the first reporting period was January 2024. The transitional period is only a period for reporting, collecting data. It's important for us to collect meaningful and good data in order to do a good analysis. I often hear that why do we need to provide all the data? Even from the definitive regime, there will be the possibility to use the default values. That's true. Although the system is based on providing actual emissions, we think that, and that it's important, of course, to collect that data for us in order to analyze also the impact of the CBAM. And that's crucial. If we only collect default values, which were published by the Commission last December, we will not be able, of course, to do a good analysis. But at the same time, it's also good for exporters to understand CBAM and to understand how to monitor and report emissions. But also, for example, for you, for importers, in order to make decisions, in order to be able to compare the values, for example, with default values, or the results with default values, also with actual emissions. I know that this is a challenge, and we will come back to that later on. I know that sometimes it's difficult to get that data. As you know, we have provided flexibilities until July of this year, which will be the third reporting period, the second reporting period for 2024, where of course default values can be used, but then from October we expect you to move, or that's what the legislation says, you should be able to provide real data that will be helpful for us, but also for you and for the exporters to start to learn in the system. Otherwise, it will be difficult to learn from the CBAM implementation. But I will come back to that point later on. So, just finally, I wanted to say that during the transitional period, this obligation is quarterly, and the reports have been arriving to us with some issues at the beginning. You know that there is a registry, and the colleagues will be explaining and presenting the registry to you. But I think that all those teething issues were solved as quickly as we could in February. So now the system should be working well. But if there are still problems, please send your comments to us, and we will have a discussion with our IT colleagues in order to improve the registry. But this is a way also for everyone to learn, because there will be a new registry for the definitive regime. The definitive regime will be different, as you know. But in any case, I think that the good practice during this period will help us a lot with the definitive registry. That's something that we are accelerating, as we are accelerating also the authorizations for the CBAM declarants, so that it can be applicable or can be open to all of you from the beginning of next year. Final point, there is no accreditation, there is no verification obligation during the transitional period. This will only be from 2026. And as you know, there are no financial obligations also during the transitional period. We are just learning, we are listening to you, and what we want to do, of course, is to improve the system, to make it robust, to make it simple, and also to make it fit for the purpose and the objectives that I explained before. And with that, sorry for rushing, but I think that most of that was already known by many of you, or most of you. I think that the best is that now we come into the more details and the more nitty-gritty issues, and then I will give the floor to Maxime to explain a bit better in detail how the transitional period works, and in particular who are the actors and the different roles. After that, we will make a short break, possibly, to have a look at the Slido or at the chat and try to answer some of your questions in relation to those sections. So please do not hesitate in sending your questions, and we will try to cover them. Thank you very much, and Maxime, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vicente. Good morning, everyone. Now let's dive a bit more in the actors which have a role to play in CBAM implementation. Starting from the start, from the production of the goods in installations which are located outside of the EU, and starting from the left side of the slide, we have the operators of installation. So, like I said, there are installations producing the good outside of the EU, and these producers of the CBAM goods, they are the one monitoring the embedded emissions of the good that they produce, and goods which will be later exported to the EU. And this monitoring of embedded emissions and all the relevant data will be shared, has to be shared with the reporting declarants. The reporting declarants is the name that we have during the transitional period. They are EU-based importers or indirect customer representatives, and my colleague Herman will give you further details on that. But the main point is that the reporting declarants are the one, they have a central role to play. They are the one on which the CBAM reporting obligation lies. That's very important to stress. When the goods are imported into the EU, they are the one, of course, providing the OE number, and they are the one responsible to comply with the reporting obligations. To do that, there are different ways. You have also on the top side of the screen the customs authorities. When they check the OE number of the import of the good imported into the EU, and they are also in charge of informing the importers of their CBAM related obligations, if they are. And they are also providing very important data to the European Commission. And that's very important to stress. We at the European Commission, we have this oversight role at the EU level of how CBAM works, how it is effectively implemented. We access this data, and we provide the national competent authorities with an indicative assessment of what we think is not going well. For instance, if we have information on possible importers which have failed to comply with the reporting obligations, or if they have, for instance, submitted incorrect or incomplete information. And we share this information, this indicative assessment, with the national competent authorities. So we are back at the member states level together with the customs authorities. And that's very important to stress because, as you can imagine, this is a snapshot. But at the same time, in practice, we all know that all these different steps and processes, they require a constant and regular dialogue between the different actors. And that's key for CBAM implementation. And we also know that it may be a challenge, for instance, in the collection of information and the sharing of information between the operators of installation and reporting declarants. And we know that there is a challenge, and that's why we have reporting flexibilities, for instance, the default values that Vicente mentioned already. On the next slide, a bit more concrete, how does it work? So this slide shows you the different purposes of the CBAM transitional registry. When we focused on the reporting declarants, we did not say how it works. The way it works is that the national competent authorities, they will give credentials to the reporting declarants so they can access this transitional registry, which will do two things. First, this is the EU single tool for reporting declarants to report the relevant information, which is necessary for them to comply with the reporting obligations. So this is, in a way, a reporting tool. They record and they submit the CBAM reports in that transitional registry, of course, in a fully secured way. And the second purpose that this transitional registry serves is to enable the communication when it comes to CBAM between the different actors. As you can see with the green arrows, the communication between the reporting declarants, the national competent authorities, also with the customs authorities, will go through the CBAM transitional registry. There are, however, some communications which may take place outside of the CBAM transitional registry. So namely, for instance, the sharing, the collection of information between the operators of installation outside the EU and the reporting declarants in the EU. We are working on this, and this is something that will be possible before the start of the definitive period, because there will be a possibility in the definitive period for the operators of installation to access a specific component of the CBAM registry for the definitive period, but we are not there yet. And the second communication outside the registry concerns the customs authorities and the reporting declarants, and this is customs. It may be customs related and not CBAM related, so that's normal. Next slide, please. Now, a bit of focus on what are the national competent authorities, and I think it's important to say a few words on that. As reporting declarants, your main line of communication is the national competent authority of the member states where you are established. That's very important because they are in the front line of the CBAM implementation. They are the one making sure that CBAM is implemented at national level. We at the Commission, we oversee the CBAM implementation. We also assess the risk, but the effective implementation of CBAM in each of the member states relies mostly on the national competent authorities. There's a role, of course, assigned to customs authorities that I mentioned, but again, when it comes to CBAM, the national competent authorities are the front line. So they do mostly three things. They grant, like I said, the reporting declarants the credentials which are necessary for them to access the CBAM transitional registry. First, they are also in charge of reviewing the CBAM reports based on the indicative assessment from the Commission that I mentioned in the slide before. And all this requires specific dialogue between the national competent authorities and the reporting declarant. And the last thing that the national competent authorities are responsible for is the application of penalties if, of course, there is a need to apply penalties. But again, all these different tasks and roles rely on the dialogue between the the reporting declarants and the national competent authorities of the member states when they are established. And now we'll give the floor to Herman.
Yeah, Herman will now guide us through very technical issues. Herman is an expert in customs, so this is why word processing is for you.
Thank you, Vicente. Thank you, Maxime. So, good morning, everyone. So, my name is Herman Melvante. I'm working in the Customs Legislation Unit in DG Tax Sud, and now I'm going to explain which are the relevant actors of CBAM. So, as you can see here, we have three relevant actors, which actually can be the same person. So, it depends on how the trader is acting. So, we can have the trader who is acting on his own. So, has no customs representative, and therefore, so the importer, the declarant, and is the same person, and there is no indirect representative. We may have also situation in which the trader hires indirect representative. So in this case, we will have importer and who would be one person, and customs declarant and indirect representative would be a different person. We may even have three persons involved here. So we may even have the importer, who is the person, the recipient of the goods, customs declarant, who would be an indirect customs representative, and then we would have the indirect representative. But we may also have, in this case, a customs representative. There is a data element for that in Annex B of the Union Customs Code that allows this person having a direct customs representative. Why is that so? Well, it may be some operators already ask for the possibility to have customs representative, but who is not involved in CBAM obligations, and a customs representative who would be involved in CBAM obligations. So in this case, well, as you can see here, the definition of importer is in Article 3, paragraph 15 of the CBAM regulations. So the importer is a person who files the customs declaration on his behalf, or in the case of indirect representation, the person on whose behalf the declaration is submitted. So, plainly said, so in simple words, the recipient of the goods, the person who's receiving the goods. The customs declarant, in this case, we may have, in case of indirect representation, we may have a customs declarant who is whoever submits the declaration on his behalf, on his name and on his behalf. On his name and in his name and on behalf of his and on his behalf, or the person on whose behalf the declaration is submitted, which is quite a close definition. This definition is quite close to the one that we have in the Union Customs Code in Article 5, paragraph 15 of the Union Customs Code. And finally, well, in the case of indirect representation, so the person who's lodged in the declaration in his name and on behalf of the importer, then we will have an indirect representative, which is defined in Article 18 of the Union Customs Code. So the person who files this declaration in his name and on behalf of the importer. I know it may be a little bit messy, but there is a reason for having these three different actors, because in many cases we just have imports with customs declaration. That's, let's say, the straightforward case, but we may have imports of goods, of processed products that have been obtained from goods that were declared for inward processing. I will explain that in a few minutes. Or we may even have goods that are imported, but there is no customs declaration. So I will explain that as well later. So we can go now to the next slide. In here, we can see the different situations that we may have. So who can be the reporting declarant, and who's responsible for the CBAM reporting obligation? So let's, as you can see here in this table, we have the situation where the importer is established in the European Union, and the case in which the importer is not established in the European Union, and when we have an importer who is declaring himself or using an indirect customs representative. So let's start by the easy case. So the easy case is where the importer is not based in the European Union. So in this case, the importer needs to have an indirect customs representative. There is no way the importer can, according to the current text of the CBAM regulation, there is no way the importer can act on his own. So that's not possible, and the only possible scenario is where the importer can have an indirect customs representative. So in this case, if the importer is not established in the European Union, he or she must appoint an indirect customs representative. And in this case, this indirect customs representative has to take on responsibility. So in the reporting obligation, there is a possibility for the indirect customs representative to reject this responsibility, but if the importer is not established in the European Union, then this indirect customs representative has to take on responsibility. Let's go to the other case, the case where the importer is established in the European Union. So in this case, the importer himself or herself can be responsible for CBAM obligations, in this case for the reporting obligations. If we only have one person here, well, it's easy to find out who the responsible is going to be. But we may also have the case in which the importer is established in the European Union, but is hiring a customs representative, an indirect customs representative. And in this case, there are two possibilities. Either the importer takes on responsibility for the CBAM obligations, or the customs representative, the indirect customs representative, accepts taking responsibility for the reporting obligations. So these are the two possibilities we may have in this case. And well, that said, now we can go to the next slide in this presentation, where I'm going to explain a little bit what happens in the case of import processing. Well, as you know, CBAM, the CBAM regulation covers goods released for free circulation, so goods imported, according to the definition in this regulation, and this may be, as I said before, direct release for free circulation, so goods that are directly imported, directly taken from a third country and released for free circulation, or goods that are firstly declared for inward processing and then used to process them to obtain processed products. So if those processed products are subject to CBAM, so they are listed in Annex 1, or the raw materials that have been used, that have been declared for inward processing, are also listed in the Annex 1 of the CBAM regulation, then there will be a CBAM obligation. When does this CBAM obligation incur? Well, this CBAM obligation doesn't incur when the goods are declared for inward processing. It can only take place when the goods or the processed products obtained from those goods are released for free circulation, so they are imported, even in the case where those processed products are not subject to CBAM. We may also have in inward processing, well, I guess most of you know what are we talking about when we talk about equivalent goods. So normally when we talk about inward processing, goods are, so the raw materials come from a third country, they are imported, they are taken to the European Union, they are processed, and then we have processed products which are still non-union goods because they have not been released for free circulation. But in the case of equivalent goods, it's the other way around. So we have raw materials that are union raw materials, so they are not subject to customs supervision. They are processed, and we get equivalent goods out of them. So we get, in this case, processed products, which are union processed products that can be exported, and then we can take non-union goods from a third country to the European Union. In this case, those non-union goods, equivalent to the union goods that were used to process the processed products, can become directly union goods. And in this case, there is, according to the current text we have now, there is no CBAM obligation as well. And finally, on simplification of Article 170 of the Delegated Act of the Union Customs Code, most of you, or many of you, would not be concerned about that, but I think it's worth mentioning it. As you know, there is a simplification in this article whereby the goods that are declared for inward processing are deemed to be released for free circulation, so deemed to be imported without a customs declaration. So just the fact that the time limit for processing elapses triggers this importation. So with the current text of the Delegated Act of the UCC, of the Union Customs Code, this simplification could not be used for CBAM goods, but we are working on an amendment so we can take these operators, these traders on board as well. But but we have to be aware that well, in this case we don't have we don't have any customs declaration as such. So the importer is still the holder of the authorization, of the inward processing authorization. But the importation, as I said before, takes place at the moment where the time limit for processing lapses. So that's all I wanted to say, and now I think we go for the Q&A session, because there may be lots of questions. Are they?
I take the relay. Alina is taking control of the questions, so we will try to group the questions by groups in order to try to reply and to pay satisfaction to all of you. I think that most of the questions, of course, are in relation to the issue of the de minimis rule and the obligation to declare above a certain threshold. As you know, there is currently a de minimis rule of 150 euros per consignment. I have to say that the rule or the 150 euros are not in the CBAM regulation. There is a reference to the customs code, to the Union Customs Code, which, as you know, also is under review, and where the Commission has also proposed to remove that threshold. I think it's important to say that because, well, first of all, we realize now with the practice that 150 euros per consignment may be very low, in particular after many goods were introduced also into the scope, like, for example, the fasteners. And also the fact that this 150 euros rule may be removed from the customs obligations may be, I think it makes a good point to discuss and to analyze also what happens with the CBAM. We are analyzing this, we are discussing this, we are going to engage with the NCAs in a discussion for the definitive regime, what to do with that. Also from our experience, this is how or what, as I said before, is so important that we collect good data during the transitional period, because this data is helping us to understand. I will tell you in full transparency that, for example, around 90% of the importations correspond to less than 10% of the emissions or 10% of the quantities or amounts of imported goods. That gives you already an indication of the importance of the magnitude of the importations and therefore also the importance of some sort of simplification. But we are still analyzing, we are aware of that, and we want to come with simplifications. I think there are also many questions about how to simplify the system and how to make it more streamlined. And I have to say that in the definitive regime, the system will be easier in the sense that there will be also verification of the emissions. So I think that for the importers, the obligations will be more streamlined or easier to apply because of the existence of verification. But it's true that in the transitional period, collecting data is a challenge. I already mentioned that before, and this is repeated in the chat by many of you, and we understand that, we are aware of that. We know that from October there will be an obligation to move from default values, or let's say in a different way, there will no more the possibility to use default values, and you will have to provide real data. I mentioned before why we want this real data, and we know that there will be, of course, a challenge for many of you. What we can say is that do your best, try to collect the data, inform your exporters with sufficient time, help them to understand the methodology. We have provided guidance for importers, but also for exporters, translated in different languages in our website. We are also doing some outreach campaign. For example, we've been in a number of important third countries in order to explain the methodology and in order for them to understand CBAM as much as possible. As we said before, and I think it was also Maxime who mentioned that, the penalties in the system are there meant to be addressed to those who do not comply at all. So those who do not really submit their reports in the CBAM transitional period registry. And the period is a period for all of us to learn. But if we don't do an effort to collect the data, it will be difficult for us to do a good assessment, and it will be difficult also for the exporters to learn and to understand the methodology and to apply CBAM from 2026. So this is why we can only make a call. We sympathize, and I mean we understand sometimes the big challenges with reporting the data, but let's try to do an effort and let's try to cooperate as much as we can. In any case, again, we are going to engage now with the national competent authorities of member states. We want to organize a meeting before the summer break, and I'm already announcing this today, but that's the intention, where we want to discuss all these type of things in order to get ready and to be prepared, of course, for October, which will be the reporting period where actual emissions will have to be reported. There were also questions about the verification. Yes, I confirm that the verification is only compulsory from 2026. Now we are working on the different modalities or different elements in relation to the verification. Well, first there is the accreditation of the verifiers, and as you know, in the CBAM regulation, those are the 27 accreditation bodies in the European Union. But then there is the question of who can become a verifier, how to verify the emissions, how the report will be. I mean, these type of issues, of course. We are now working on all these modalities, and we hope that by the beginning of next year we will be able to adopt an implemented and delegated act with respect to the verification. But I can confirm that, of course, the verification is only compulsory from 2026. There are questions about the FAQ and the questions and answers. As you know, we have a document in our website which lists the most common questions, and we try to provide good answers, simple answers to those questions. This is updated from time to time. It's true that the last update was some time ago, but now we are collecting more recent questions on many of those issues, including the questions that you are raising here, and we intend to come with a revised FAQ before the summer break. This time we will try to find a way how to highlight and make more predominant or more clear what are the changes with respect to the previous version. I'm looking at my colleague Katarina, who will be presenting now because she's responsible of the update of the FAQ, but that's of course something that we want to do now very, very soon. There were questions also about confidentiality and the data that can be shared between exporters and importers, because sometimes, very often, this is one of the excuses or pretext or reasons, let's leave it like reasons, used by the exporters not to share the data with importers. We are aware of that. And now what I can tell you is that we are working to accelerate a module in the registry that will give access to the third country installations in the CBAM registry by the beginning of next year, possibly by 1st January 2025. As soon as I have the confirmation, we will put it on our website, but the colleagues in the IT department are working hard in order to have it ready by the 1st of January. That will give the opportunity to exporters or producers in third countries to submit those sensitive parameters in that registry to us. They will not need to share with you, and we will not share this information with you because this is sensitive for them, but that information is important for us because it's the way to make a good calculation or estimation of the emissions. Otherwise, it's difficult to really check or double check that the estimation of the emission is good. And let's be clear, this is the transitional period, this is the learning period. We are not trying here to apply penalties to those who make a misjudgment or a bad calculation of the emissions. To the contrary, what we want to do is to provide feedback to them in order to improve, in order to make sure that from the definitive regime they are applying the methodology in a correct way. We are already, for example, contacting those importers that have not declared in the first and in the second, well, we started with the first reporting period, and we are not approaching them as saying this is the penalty because you didn't declare. We are asking them what the problem is, if it was a question of no knowledge of the CBAM at all, or because they had technical problems, or because there were other good reasons why they were not declaring. And also we are providing also feedback to those who made errors, evident errors in the system. So we are going to, of course, do that. So again, it's a system, or the transitional period was meant as a period for all of us to learn. We are learning a lot. As you can see, we are listening to you. We are working on solutions. We want to simplify. We want to reduce the administrative burden as much as possible. I have to say that sometimes it's more difficult in the transitional period than in the definitive regime. I completely agree, because it's the first time that we apply. It's also because we are asking for data which has not been verified, so we know the challenges. But let's be reassured that the intention is not to punish. The intention is to provide feedback to everyone and to start learning with the application of CBAM. And I think that with that, Alina, I covered.
Yeah, we have received a number of questions that I think Germán should answer. I've sent them to him, so he'll go through them.
I'll try to go as quick as fast as possible. So the first question was, why can the EU customs authorities not provide the import data to the reporting CBAM declarants? So, for example, based on the ORI number, if the importer is not based in the EU and the indirect representative does not want to take responsibility for CBAM reporting, can a CBAM indirect representative be assigned? Well, customs authorities, they have the information on the customs declarations, but the customs declarations don't include some information which is CBAM relevant. That's why the EU customs authorities cannot provide all the information for the reporting that the reporting CBAM declarants can provide. On top of that, we have, as I said before, situations in which we don't even have a customs declaration. So whatever the angle we see it from, we need the traders to report that. And of course, as the question mentions, yes, a CBAM indirect representative can be assigned. It has to be a customs representative, because that's what the legal text says. So it has to be a customs indirect representative, and he or she can be CBAM representative in this case. So he can submit the CBAM reports. Another question, will a non-EU-based company be able to do CBAM reporting itself if they have local EU VAT registration? Well, the answer is no. If the company is not established in the European Union with the current legal text, this company cannot be a reporting according to Article 32 of the regulation. So this company has to designate an indirect customs representative, and this indirect customs representative has to report, has to send the CBAM report. So that's an obligation. Another question, is it possible to have single indirect representative for all imports in the various member states while not established in all the member states? Yes, the answer is yes. Of course, you can have one single indirect representative, that's not a problem. More questions, is the reporting for CBAM different depending on whether the goods are released for free circulation on the basis of Article 85 or 86 of the Union Customs Code? No, there is no difference. These articles refer to the calculation of the customs debt. That has nothing to do with CBAM. So no, this doesn't depend on whether Article 85 or 86 is used. What about outward processing? That's an interesting question. So in the case of now in the transitional period, outward processing has to be reported as well. So when the processed products are imported, are taken back to the European Union, the emissions of this processed product have to be in the CBAM report. Whereas after the transitional period, the emissions have to be declared, but only for the processing operations. So that's Article 6 of the regulation. And I think I have two more, and that's it. It is very unclear, the reporting process, when we have complex figures with the word processing. Are you planning to clarify this using real examples? Well, there are some. As soon as I'm concerned, there is a long list of questions and answers, and I think some examples are provided in in this Q&A document. I think we have the link available somewhere. So
In the website.
Yeah, we can send it to the audience. And how to manage low value consignments in special regimes. So if I introduce in a customs warehouse good value of 5,000, but I release for free circulation goods in a value less than 150. Well, as I said before, the CBAM obligations arise when the goods are released for free circulation. So having goods in customs warehouse doesn't entail any CBAM obligations. And the values that are considered are the values which are in the customs declaration for release for free circulation. So in this case, the customs value would be 150. However, there is also a circumvention clause in the CBAM regulation. So if it is detected that this is done to circumvent, then some measures could be applied as established in this article. I think it's Article 27 of the CBAM regulation. So I think I already covered all the answers.
Yeah, maybe very briefly before we move to the next session, because I can see that questions continue arriving about collecting data, the quality of the data, access to the data, the extension of the use of the default values. I already referred to that. What I can tell you also is that, because there are questions about how many reports we have received, if we are satisfied with that, I can tell you that in each of the 2 quarters we received more than 16,000 reports. That doesn't mean much because one report may cover different importations or different producers, so it's difficult. But we are, of course, checking that data against the data from the customs and also from the trade statistics in order to see also the plausibility or the correctness or the completeness of the data. We can say in general that we are very satisfied. I think we are covering a lot or a big percentage, of course, of the imported CBAM goods into the EU. There are still some missing reports. We are contacting those who were not declaring. I have to say that sometimes it was a question of identification number. You refer to who is in the customs declaration and who is in the CBAM declaration. I mean, sometimes there are some mismatches. But I think in general we can be satisfied that with a new measure, which is starting now, complex, something completely new, which doesn't exist anywhere. I mean, I think that in general there is a good compliance. And we expect, of course, this to increase, to improve over the time. And I think, of course, the challenge will be now when we move, well, first in July, because as you know, until July there is a period for correcting the declarations. So we are not now yet looking so much at the calculations. We are just trying to make sure that everybody understands and complies. But then, of course, after July and in particular from October, we will go into more granularity. With respect to the default values, what I can tell you also is that still 95% of the declarants are based on default values. That's not a surprise. But I can say that, for example, there is one sector which is an exemption, which is the cement sector, where more than 40% have already provided actual emissions. It may be because we are talking about a limited number of exporters, which are large exporters of multinationals. We have experience in monitoring and reporting their emissions, but the reality is that there is a difference between one sector and another. In terms, of course, of countries of origin, as expected, is basically the neighboring countries, and then, of course, the big producers around the world, like China, India, but also US, Canada, of course, UK. These are the main suppliers of the CBAM goods to the EU. Then, of course, there are some specific cases like aluminum from Mozambique or fertilizer from Trinidad and Tobago. But I mean, in general, the trade patterns are seen also in the CBAM declarations. And then, in terms of the countries where we are importing all the CBAM goods, again, as expected, the largest EU member states, but also, of course, the Netherlands, but also Poland. Well, Poland is one of the large member states, but okay, of course, again, Germany, France, Spain as the biggest importers, and Italy of the CBAM goods. There are more technical questions about, I think, leaning more to the methodology and to other aspects, but I think they will be more or less covered through the different presentations from now onwards. So I propose...
There's only one question targeted to Maxime that maybe he wants to take.
Yeah, there was one question about the CBAM certificates, when and how to buy them. In the presentation, we focused mainly on the transitional period, and we touched upon some of the rules for later in the definitive period, but we did not mention how the authorized CBAM declarants will comply with the obligation to compensate for the embedded emissions of the goods that they imported into the EU. And the financial adjustment, if there is one, based on the specifics of the goods, they will take the form of CBAM certificates, which will have to be bought by authorized CBAM declarants. And the sale of CBAM certificates will take place on a common central platform, which will be a different platform from the CBAM registry. And on that platform, the authorized CBAM declarants will buy the CBAM certificates from the member states where they are established. And that obligation kicks in 26 for the definitive period only. There is no such obligation for the transitional period. And we are currently working to prepare the rules which will apply on the sales of CBAM certificates from the member states to the authorized CBAM declarants, again, established in their territory. These rules will be applicable, as I said, as from 1st January 26, and we will make it work on time so that the sale can take place, and the CBAM declarants, the authorized CBAM declarants, will be able to buy CBAM certificates. And you know that there is an obligation at the end of each quarter for the authorized CBAM declarants to make sure that they have a sufficient number of CBAM certificates, knowing that one CBAM certificate corresponds, just like EU ETS allowances, to 1 ton of CO2 emissions. And then there's an obligation at the end of each quarter that the authorized CBAM declarants have a sufficient number of CBAM certificates on their CBAM account in the CBAM registry. So that's what we can say. And on the price will depend on the weekly prices, an average of the weekly prices of the ETS allowances. And we have yet to adopt an implementing act with the calculation of these weekly prices. But yeah, the principle is that the CBAM certificates will have the same price as the ETS allowances.
Okay, thank you, Maxime. With that, I propose that we move to the most technical part of the session of today, and Katarina and Leandro will guide us through the registry for the transitional period. So, Katarina, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Vicente. So first, a brief reminder of what are the steps to comply with the reporting obligations, and of course there, more details can be found in the technical guidance documents on our website. But very briefly, first, you will need to define the scope of the goods that are concerned. Second, you will need to determine the monitoring period used, so typically calendar year, but could depend. Thirdly, you need to identify all the parameters that you will need to report on. And again, this depends on the sector. There might be additional parameters additional to the CO2 emissions. And finally, you will need to collect the data on the carbon price due and paid in the jurisdiction of production, if applicable. Next slide, please. As you know, there's 3 categories of emissions during the ETS, and CBAM focuses on the scope 1 direct emissions. So those are emissions generated from the production of the CBAM good at the installation level, and this also includes heating and cooling processes, even if this is not at the installation themselves. And all of these direct emissions in scope 1, they need to be reported during a transitional period. And then scope 2 indirect emissions, so those emissions from electricity consumed for the production of the CBAM goods. Those also need to be reported on during the transitional period. And note that there is likely a change for the definitive period. So under current considerations, these will only be in scope for cement and fertilizer sectors for the definitive period, but this also is subject to review. And finally, there are some scope 3 indirect emissions that are also under the CBAM scope for the transitional period, and those are input materials for CBAM goods that we call precursors there are also CBAM goods themselves. So they also need to be included. And so you can see also on the slide that there are some scope-free indirect emissions upstream and downstream that fall outside of the current CBAM scope. Next slide, please. As Vicente already mentioned, in addition to the actual Commission calculation methodology, there are some flexibilities for the transitional period. So up until the end of this year, you can also use other monitoring and reporting methods if they provide a similar coverage and accuracy of emissions data. So if there's a carbon pricing scheme where the installation is located, or there's a compulsory emission monitoring scheme where the installation is located, or also if there's an emission monitoring scheme at the installation which can include verification by an accredited verifier. As you know, up until the end of July, so that is for imports up until the end of June, other reference methods, including default values, can also be used. And for the entirety of the transitional period, these estimations, including default values, can also be used for up to 20% of the total embedded emissions in the case of complex goods. Next slide, please. Then just briefly adding also to what my colleague Maxime has explained already, so the life cycle of a CBAM report from the declarant's perspective. So you will draft a CBAM report in the transitional registry, submit it, so it has a status of submitted. You then have a possibility also to correct, modify the submitted report, so it will be under amendment, or also to invalidate an already submitted report, so it will be invalidated. Then on our side, Tax Ut Commission C2, we analyze the reports, and it will also be given to the national competent authorities. And should there be a need, it will come back to you as a reporting declarant for the correction procedure. Next slide, please. This is how it looks from our side. So there is the EU customs authorities and the customs systems which are interoperable with the transitional registry. We see it as a report in the CBAM registry, and then there's several checks. So there is first an automated cross-check of customs declarations and the CBAM reports, where we can see in the case that there is no CBAM report, in the case that there should have been one, it goes to the national competent authorities for review and assessment. We might also find it as a wrong quantity of goods reported, and in any case there will be an indicative assessment by us, where we will analyze reports and indicate to national competent authorities which information is missing in reports, and we will provide guidance. And this would go to the NCAs for their review and assessment. On our side, there's also a risk assessment on the submitted CBAM reports with a random sample, targeted sample, where we might also find that some CBAM report is not correct and that deviations are in the report that would make a correction needed, so it would also end up on our indicative assessment and with the national competent authorities. And of course, if we do not find anything in these texts, or if it's corrected, then the CBAM report is correct. Small deviations here can be accepted, and the CBAM report can be closed. I will hand it to my colleague, Leander.
Thank you, Katharina. Hello also from my side. My name is Leander Kreiger. I work in the CBAM team for industry and implementation, which also includes data and the transitional registry, which we will look at today very briefly. I would like to point out that for detailed instructions on how to use the registry and examples of how to fill in for different goods, there are also extensive webinars available. If you go to the CBAM or Europa website, you will find those there, and they will be very helpful. I'll just focus on a few important aspects today, which we notice also play an important role for declarants when they fill in information into the registry. So as you can see on the slide, there is we are already logged into the CBAM transitional registry, and we want to declare a new good.
In this case, it is an aluminium good, 76130000, and it is coming. It's originating from the UK. If we zoom in a little bit into the next slide, we can see that just underneath we have to select the correct customs procedure, and then we also put the relevant amount of tons into the system for this procedure. Please be aware that different to customs, where it is kilogram, the commonly used measurement unit, here in the CBAM, we use tons, and we've seen sometimes a confusion about the two entities, which leads to horrendous data. So please do be aware when typing this in. So when we go a little bit further to the next slide, please, we can now once more go to the emissions, which is the most important aspect to focus on today. Here, so you click on add an emissions, you have different tabs then to fill out about the installation parameters, carbon price, and also the option to provide us with supplementary tabs, which please do if you use alternative calculation methods, or there's a carbon price. It's very important for us to get the data and see what you have put there. If we can go to the next slide, we see in the emissions tab a little bit more closely. There's basically 3 segments here. You have the part where you put in, again, for the specific emission that can be different to the number that you put in the customs procedure, but in the end they have to add up, obviously. The net mass, again, also very important in tons. And then you have the direct and indirect emissions that Katharina also just explained regarding the scope. In our example here, since it is June, and you can once more in July, when you fill out the report for the second quarter that we're in now, you can once more use the default values. So we have the default values here also selected in our example. If you do that, you will automatically get the number displayed in the registry indicated here in the red box. So it's 2.86 tons of CO2 per unit of production, which you then just fill into the specific direct emissions box. And it will then, together with the indirect emissions, where you do the same. In our example also, we've used the default values. And you see in the source of electricity element, we have selected received from the grid, which, if you choose the default values for indirect emissions, is the most logical option from the drop-down menu. If you fill in the number that is displayed there, also then into the relevant box, all the calculations will be done automatically to get the total amount of emissions for the good that you are reporting in this case. Next slide, please. So when you are done with this, I will have one more information or tip regarding the units to put in across Europe, across different countries. It is common that to use different signs for decimals or thousands. Please only use a dot here in the system. You can in fact not use any other sign anymore. Please only use a dot and only use it to separate decimals. If you want to use it to separate the 1,000 places, you will get very wrong numbers. But it's also part of the learning phase, I guess. And if you're done, then you can go on validate. There will be an arrow displayed on the next slide pointing to it. And after you saved it, you can then either come back to it at a later stage, or you can also validate it and proceed. And that will be it for this part of the No, of course not. Sorry, just an overview. It's always the month after the quarter that you should be reporting in. So now for this second quarter, it's until the end of July, where you should be reporting. If you're here for the first time today, and this is all very new to you, and you worry that you have had to report something at the end of last year, do not worry. Please do reach out to your responsible NCA where you're established with your AORI number, and they can then provide you with a code to still submit CBAM reports for the quarters where the reporting should have been done originally already. So now I think there should be time for some questions.
Thank you, Katarina and Leander. Before I turn to Alina and Rocío to check whether there are some technical questions, I would like to refer to two issues that have been raised also in the chat, which are more general. One is about how to translate the carbon price into reduction of emissions to be declared. I mentioned before that we are analyzing this in particular. We are looking at how to assign the price, the carbon price paid for the emissions to the specific goods imported into the EU, which is a bit tricky, I have to say. It's something similar to what happens with emissions, where you need to make an estimation from, or a transfer of the emissions from the installation to the specific goods, which are exported and imported into the EU. The same goes for the carbon price. And also, of course, who can verify that carbon price, what should be the type of certificate, etc. Then the question is, of course, how this carbon price is deducted. We didn't bring here the formula for the calculation of the CBAM, but the idea is that once you have made an estimation of your emissions and an estimation of your carbon price, what you do is that you translate that carbon price into a number of certificates, and that reduces the number of the mandatory certificates that you need to buy to cover those emissions. We are still discussing how to do that translation. There might be different ways. For example, one could be to take an average price of the certificates in the previous year or in the previous quarter. I mean, that's something that we are still analyzing. But the idea, of course, is that the carbon price will be deducted through a number of certificates, or will be translated into a number of certificates that do not need to be bought for compliance with the CBAM. But that will come in 2026 or even in 2027. So for the moment, we don't need to use that in the transitional period. But that's one of the issues that we are discussing. There are questions about Northern Ireland. As you know, the introduction of the CBAM was meant not to bring any new divide or war between Northern Ireland and Ireland in the south of the isle, of course, or with the rest of the European Union. I have to say that when it comes, for example, for CBAM goods, I think there is only one producer of CBAM goods. I think it's cement in Northern Ireland, which doesn't really export to the rest of the European Union, so that's not a big issue. There is the question of the production of electricity, but as you know, also electricity in Northern Ireland is subject to the EU ETS, so that's not a problem. The idea, of course, is that by introducing CBAM, there will not be new controls or new borders between Northern Ireland and the rest of the EU. But of course, if goods from third countries, including GB, Great Britain, are transiting or transferred through Northern Ireland to end in the EU market, these should be declared. For example, if a GB producer of steel sells steel through Northern Ireland to an importer in Ireland, the importer in Ireland will have to declare this importation. In any case, we are aware of the fact that CBAM has to be added to the Annex 2 of the protocol of the Windsor framework, not any more than another Irish protocol, but to the Windsor framework in order to apply. And we also need to discuss with the UK also the modalities. But at the same time, as you know, the UK is also considering the introduction of the CBAM. So there is a conversation which is pending. I hope that after all the elections, this will be possible. You also know that the Labour Party in the UK, for example, is announcing more alignment with the EU ETS and also, of course, with the EU CBAM. So I think that all these, of course, will, once there will be clarity about all these things, it will be easier. For the moment, what I can tell you is that if you are importing steel from a third country which has been transiting through Northern Ireland, you also have to declare in your CBAM declaration. And Alina,
Yes.
I turn to you and Rocío to see whether there are technical questions, maybe about the registry, something that wasn't clear.
Yes, we have received a number of questions. I'll let Rocío go through them and reply, and I'll assign to the different colleagues the questions that we have received.
I can.
You can
Okay, you can
speak.
speak.
Yeah,
Rocío, speak free.
Thank you. Well, we have received some many questions about the communication template, requesting additional explanations, and I'm happy to announce that there will be field templates, communication templates with the examples that are now in the guidance document for the installations. So that will be available very soon in the website. So in those Excel files, you will find the communication template with the examples in the guidance already included in this, which is, I think, very useful for users of the template to understand in which part of the template fits each value. And apart from that, we are now also working on a video. It's a video with a training session about how to fill the template. So it will be, it will show, it will be a recording of two experts explaining step by step how to introduce the data in the communication template, which I think that it will be also be very helpful. It has been done for steel products, because of course we couldn't do it for all the products, but I think that that's one of the most complex examples, so it will be very helpful also for other products. Then we have received some questions about which other methods are valid, and then we have to distinguish between the July 2024 and then after the end of the year. So until July 2024, any other method is in principle valid for reporting, including the default values, but also the other methods and other methodologies. But that has to be registered and specified in the registry. And from that date until the end of the year, is not so open, let's say. So there are more criteria for those methodologies. So I mean that's set in Article 4 of the implementing regulation. So it should be a methodology related to the carbon pricing scheme, where the installation is located, a compulsory emission monitoring scheme where the installation is located, or an emission monitoring scheme at the installation, which can include verification by accredited verifier. So they say that until the end of the year, from July until the end of the year, other methodologies are also allowed, but with some specific requirements. Let me go through. Well, I think that it will be very useful for anyone to check the fact document and also the frequent asked questions, because I think that many questions are already answered there, and for sure that will be very useful. Yes.
On the question on the different products and whether we have done sessions per product, indeed we have recorded sessions per product explaining how to calculate embedded emissions per product, and I recommend you to have a look at our website where we have published them and recorded them. Then
I think that there are also a couple of questions about carbon capture and storage.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, CBAM recognizes that as a way to deduct the CO2 emissions from an installation, but under certain conditions. I will not go further into details, that's explained in the implementing regulation, but it has to be a geological permanent storage. And also requires to be monitored and certain criteria to ensure that the CO2 is actually fixed, let's say, stored, and not further released in the carbon capture storage system. Then for the carbon capture and utilization, in that sense, well, it should be chemically bound into the substance, and it shouldn't be the emissions of CO2 should be retained along the life cycle of the product. For example, there are some questions about whether methanol or e-fuels. So in that case, no. I mean, because then it's expected that if it's a fuel, that those emissions will be emitted again. There, in the case of e-fuels, there are also rules under the renewable sources energy directive. Okay, this is now we are in the process also to implement that also.
Yeah, maybe in relation to that, because maybe the questions come from a public consultation which has been launched now by Klima about those goods, or those emissions will be embedded, as you say, chemically bound into some goods. And there will be a list, possibly a list of those goods which qualify for CCU as permanently chemically bound. And what I can say in general is that we are following these approaches, of course. Whatever we do in CBAM has to be consistent with the ETS, and we follow the same rules as in the ETS. So if in the future there will be something that there will be a delegated act possibly which will say this list of goods are those who qualify for CCU because they are chemically bound and therefore they can comply, or those emissions will not be taken into account in the EU ETS as emitted, that will be the same for the CBAM. And that will be, of course, taken into account in the methodology that Rocío in particular and her team are finalizing for the definitive regime. So that's, of course, something that we will take into account. But just to say that we mirror the EU ETS as much as we can, of course, here. And I think this is one of the areas, of course, where we need to do the same, because we want to treat the goods in the same way, imported or produced in the EU. Sorry, Rocío, for interrupting.
Exactly, you have explained it very well. I was trying to figure out how to say it. Because,
no, but I wanted to refer to this consultation because I know that it has just been released, and maybe the questions come because of this consultation, but the Comisión de Clima.
True. So as Vicente said, it's a matter of how the EU ETS will implement those rules, and then CBAM will mirror those rules. Then there is also a question about ammonia, which whether if it's not used for fertilizers, for example, if ammonia is used as fuel or to reduce emissions. Well, in that case, I mean, the greenhouse gas emissions coming from nitrogen are only monitored for fertilizers. So if ammonia is used in any other process and produce nitrous oxide, then it's not, because those emissions, as I said, they are only monitored in the fertilizer products. So yeah, I mean, that's and another, and then there was also a question about carbon capture and storage that I think we have explained.
Then there are a couple questions about inward processing once again. I would let Germán clarify.
Yeah, thank you, Alina. So yeah, I have two more questions. So what if the value of CBAM goods in inward processing product released for free circulation is worth less than 150 euros? Should be reported in CBAM? Well, as Vicente already mentioned before, there is a de minimis rule, which is referring to the duty relief regulation, and which establishes, sets out a value of 150 euros. And so consignments that are below this value are not subject to CBAM. That's what Article 3 of the CBAM regulation states. So in this case, if the value of CBAM goods in import processing that are afterwards released for free circulation is less than this threshold, then of course CBAM regulation doesn't apply, and this applies both to the transitional and to the post-transitional period. But again, as I said before, there is an article 27, on circumvention measures. So authorities will also monitor whether these consignments are declared because there is a legitimate reason or because there is a circumvention. That said, there is another question: are CBAM products shipped under temporary import via ATACarnet also impacted? No, the answer is no, because only so CBAM regulation applies to imports, so to release for free circulation. So that's those are the answers to those questions. I don't know if there are other questions pending or
no.
No.
There's one, sorry, for review.
Yes, sorry, because there was one about EcoInvent database emission factors, and I think that's probably some, let's say, mix between the default values and the other methodologies. As far as I understand, those values used as default values are not valid. I mean, if you want to use default values, then they have to be the ones that are already published. And EcoInvent is a database very commonly used for life cycle assessment, but within the methodology of CBAM is not allowed. So that will be the answer from
Thank you, Rocío. I think we can move on now. We come to the last session. It will be presented by Theo and Hannes about legislative developments, and also first Theo on the legislative developments. Theo is trying to find his place. And then also Hannes will say something about the future of the CBAM regulation. So Theo, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I had to switch places because I saw you couldn't see me. It's always better like this. So okay, my name is Theo Gatalo. I'm part of the legal team within the unit, and I'm just gonna quickly walk you over the work plan for the next 1.5 years, so that you also understand a bit the timeline of the deliverables. So as you can see in this slide, we expect quite a few pieces of secondary legislation. Overall, in the next 1.5 years, 7 implementing acts and 2 delegated acts, which you see in orange. I'm quickly gonna walk you over it. So the 2 which are already quite advanced are the implementing acts. First, on the conditions for the authorization of CBAM declarants. As you know, in the definitive period, importers or their indirect representatives will need to be authorized, and this act will lay down the conditions and procedures to be followed to receive this authorization. The second, already quite advanced draft act concerns the CBAM registry, where we will determine the infrastructure and the practical arrangements of this IT system. Later, still planned for this year, is an implementing act on the customs procedures and communications. Here we will outline the information on imports and the periodicity in which this information should be shared with the Commission, and this implementing act will also detail how CBAM should apply to the special case of the exclusive economic zone of the member states. Our next implementing act concerns the accreditation of verifiers and the principle of verification. And actually, in the work stream for verification and accreditation, there's going to be one implementing act and one delegated act. And the big questions are going to be who can be verifiers, which qualifications do they need to meet, and how should they apply the verification principles, which already are outlined in broad strokes in Annex 6 to the CBAM regulation, but we're of course gonna provide more details in these pieces of secondary legislation. As you see in bright blue, by the end of the year, we also expect to present a report to the co-legislators on a possible extension of the CBAM scope to downstream products. I'm going to say a bit more still on that point later. Early in the next year, we plan to adopt a delegated act on the sale and repurchase of CBAM certificates. As you know, this will be done through the common central platform, NIT platform, which is in the process to be decided upon and to be set up. In this delegated act, we'll determine the procedures and the timing and the management for the sale and the repurchase of those CBAM certificates. Then 3 last acts planned for mid of next year. The first one concerns the calculation of emissions. Here we will outline the methodology to be used in the definitive period to calculate the embedded emissions, and we'll also determine the structure of the CBAM declaration in the definitive period. Secondly, in mid-2025, there's going to be an implementing act on the carbon price paid in third countries and on the price of certificates. There was already something said on this before. Essentially, we're going to define how a carbon price effectively paid will be translated into a corresponding reduction of CBAM certificates to be surrendered. And of course, we're also going to outline clearly which kinds of carbon prices are eligible. Lastly, we will adopt an implementing act outlining how the CBAM certificates to be surrendered will be adjusted for the free allocation of allowances under the EU ETS. Also for next year, we plan a potential revision of the CBAM regulation. This will, on the one hand, concern more technical amendments, and on the other side, potentially, depending on the assessment in the transitional period, also an extension of the scope, potentially to downstream sectors and to other EU ETS groups. All right. To finish on this slide. Still go back.
Sorry.
Don't worry. You see that there are different reports planned to the co-legislators by mid and 2025. One is going to be a report on the general implementation and application of the CBAM regulation. A second one will concern the specific case of Article 2.7, so it will detail the conditions to be met and to be exempted from CBAM for electricity. And lastly, there's going to be a report where we will assess how EU financing contributes to decarbonization in LDCs, of manufacturing in LDCs. Now you can move on to the next slide. So just to conceptualize a bit further for you, we broke this slide down into several work streams. On the left side of the screen and on the right side of the screen, you will see the deliverables or the outcome expected from these work streams. So it's going to be a bit of a repetition to what I've said previously. The first work stream concerns this possible extension of the scope to downstream products, and it will result by end of 2024 in a report to Parliament and Council. The second analytical work stream concerns the extension to other goods and to the transport of CBAM goods. On this, we're going to present a report by mid 2025. And the last 3 work streams you see on this page will all result in the adoption of the implementing act on the calculation of embedded emissions. So first, the work stream concerning the CBAM methodology for calculating embedded emissions. Secondly, the specific case of imported electricity as a CBAM good. And lastly, the calculation of indirect emissions for the CBAM sectors for which indirect emissions are already within the scope. And as you see on this, we're also going to present a report where we will assess whether indirect emissions should also be extended to the remaining CBAM sectors, namely iron and steel, aluminium, and hydrogen. Now we're going to move on to the last slide. Still the same principle. On the left you see the work streams, and on the right you see the expected deliverables. I've already said something on verification that accreditation is a work stream which is already very active and which will result by the end of this year in an implementing act and in a delegated act. As you know, by mid next year, we're also gonna present and publish a new set of default values, which will be the ones applicable in the definitive period, and those are gonna be by exporting country, and they will be subject to a markup, as is explained in the annex of the CBAM regulation. The two last work streams which I'm going to present now is the one for the adjustment of free allocation. As you know, the idea is that while CBAM is phased in, the free allowances of the EU ETS are phased out. And of course, technically, we'll have to determine very clearly how this adjustment is going to play out, also taking into account the different product benchmarks used under the EU ETS. And again, this work stream is gonna flow into the adoption of an implementing act by mid of next year. Lastly, and already also repeating what I've said before, one important work stream is gonna be the carbon price paid in third countries, which, if effectively paid, will lead to a reduction of the C1 certificates to be surrendered in the definitive period. And this workstream will also result in an implementing act by mid of 2025. This was a broad overview over the secondary legislation and the work streams involved in it. I will stop for here, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Theo. I think that now we can move to Hannes, and then we will try to take all the questions together.
Yeah, good morning also from my side. My name is Hannes Platz, and in the last part of this webinar, we finally want to point your attention to the various support and guidance offered by the Commission to importers and producers of CBAM goods alike. They exist, for example, trainings such as e-learnings and webinars, both general and sector-specific, which are usually recorded to provide technical support and capacity building tailored to the specific needs of the CBAM implementation. The Commission also compiled extensive and tailored guidance documents for importers and producers in third countries. There exist templates to facilitate data collection and information exchanges. And our dedicated information portal is the CBAM website, which I will present in more details in a bit, as well as an IT interface to facilitate the reporting process, which is so far mainly the CBAM transitional registry, including a detailed guidance for users of the portal. Specifically to add installation operators outside the EU, the Commission has translated the related guidance document for installation operators in third countries in multiple languages, including, for instance, Arabic, Chinese, Hindi, Korean, Spanish, Turkish, and Ukrainian. Next slide, please. CBAM is an internationally open mechanism that can and will be complemented by bilateral, multilateral, and international cooperation with third countries. Dialogues are already established, and numerous will follow with other countries. To give an example, the EU is supporting various third countries in establishing their own carbon pricing instruments, and as already shared before, there will be a deduction for CBAM of the carbon price already effectively paid in third countries, be it under a carbon emissions reduction scheme in the form of tax, levy, or fee. CBAM is building on other initiatives such as G7's Climate Club or the OECD's inclusive.
Yes,
Quelqu'un vient de
Hannes.
la sourdre apparemment.
We think we are back. Sorry for the problem. We had technical
Ça
problems
va.
with the connection. We tried to
Peut-être
fix
que-
them. So we had a forced refreshment break. Actually, we were getting to the end, but I preferred Hannes may have the opportunity to finalize his presentation, and maybe after that I will conclude. Again, I really apologize for the technical problem. So Hannes, maybe you can restart a bit.
Okay. But we don't have the slides anymore.
Try to get them up.
Okay, anyway, you can
But-
start because
Yeah.
the first slide was on the screen before.
Okay, so in the last part of this webinar, we finally want to point your attention to the various support and guidance offered by the Commission to importers and producers of CBAM goods alike. There are, for example, trainings such as e-learnings and webinars, both general and sector-specific, which are usually recorded to provide technical support, and capacity building tailored to the specific needs of the CBAM implementation. The Commission also compiled extensive and tailored guidance documents for importers and operators in third countries, as well as templates to facilitate data collection and information exchanges. Our dedicated information portal is the CBAM website, and there's also an IT interface to facilitate the reporting process. So far, this relates mainly to the CBAM transitional registry and the detailed guidance for users of the portal. Next slide, please. CBAM is an internationally open mechanism that can and will be complemented by bilateral, multilateral, and international cooperation with other countries. Dialogues are already established and numerous will follow. To give an example, the EU is supporting various third countries in establishing their own carbon pricing instruments. And as already shared before by Vicente, there will be a deduction for CBAM of the carbon price already effectively paid in third countries. CBAM is building on other initiatives such as G7's Climate Club, OECD's Inclusive Forum for Climate Mitigation Approaches, and others. These complement and reinforce each other. The overarching goal of CBAM and other carbon pricing initiatives is to put globally a price on carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions, as well as to pave the way for further ambitious climate policies. We can only reiterate that climate change is a global problem that necessitates urgent and effective responses that do not stop short at the border of a country or region. Next slide, please. In case you ask yourselves now where to find further information and for always staying up to date, we kindly invite you to regularly visit our website in case you don't do so yet. Just enter TaxUD and CBAM in your search engine of choice or click on the link on this slide. The website is our dedicated information portal. It is regularly updated and also available in some other languages of the EU. It features several helpful guidance documents, including the ones highlighted before for importers and for installation operators outside the EU. You can find the link to the CBAM transitional registry in order to declare the goods imported as well as the embedded emissions. For importers, there's a template to facilitate communication with operators. And there's also a provisional list of NCAs, national competent authorities nominated by the EU member states, as well as a list of the default values used during the transitional period. The website furthermore offers registration to dedicated webinars, such as this one, and links to recordings of past webinars and e-learning materials via the Customs and Tax EU Learning portal. With our sector-specific fact sheets, importers can get a quick overview of the reporting requirements for their sectors. And finally, we invite you to look at our extensive Q&A document, which is updated every few months, and the next update is also being due soon. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our presentation now, and we'll be answering a third and final round of questions.
Yeah, thank you, Hans. Thanks a lot. And sorry for asking you to repeat twice. Now, as Hannes was saying, we are coming to the end of the presentation, but we still have some minutes, or we won't still have to take some minutes to answer some of your questions. I think that there were some questions referred to Herman, with respect to what you presented previously. And now I'm in there with you. If you could still check other burning questions that I would like to take before we conclude and wrap up.
Yeah, so thank you, Vicente. So I have a few more questions. So the first one is, are goods returning under return good relief applicable for CBAM? Well, they are indeed subject to CBAM, but in a special way. So when it comes to the reporting period, there is nothing you have to do with those goods. You don't have to report the return goods according to Article 203 of the Union Customs Code during the transitional period. And after the transitional period, so what you have to do, you have to include them in the CBAM declaration, but you have to declare 0 emissions. So that's Article 6. And on the reporting period, if I'm not mistaken, it's Article 34 of the legal text. Another question, inward processing. If it is not possible to decide which items stay in the EU and which ones leave after inward processing, do we have to report all times when they're entered in inward processing? Well, as I said before, declaring goods for inward processing does not entail any CBAM obligation. So only when the goods are released for free circulation or the processed products obtained from those goods are released for free circulation, then yes, you have to report, or you have to include those goods or those processed products in the CBAM declaration. And the last question I have is, items under inward processing that are not CBAM, but under transformation in the European Union, they become CBAM. What happens? Well, they are indeed subject to CBAM. It may be that the processing operation entails a change in origin, and then the origin is European Union. But in principle, if the goods declared for inward processing or the processed products that are released for free circulation are subject to CBAM, then are listed in Annex 1, then they are subject to CBAM, and then you have to comply with the CBAM obligations, regardless whether the raw materials were subject or not subject to CBAM. So that's it from my side.
Thank you very much. There are questions about whether we will be organizing other info sessions like this one. We organized one in Spanish. It was the first time we did a webinar in Spanish some weeks ago, taking advantage of the fact that we have some Spanish speakers in the team. We could organize, and I think it was good or welcome because that gives the possibility to those who are not so familiar or comfortable with English to listen to. We will consider maybe doing others why not in French, in German, Italian, but I mean, of course, the question is the time for the preparation, but also having good speakers in those languages. But that's something that we will be considering. Maybe not before the summer, but maybe as we come back from the summer break in September, we can organize other webinars in other languages. I think that in any case, in English, we will have to organize another one in the fall, maybe when we come to October with a big change, or the revolution from the default values to the actual emissions. This was discussed already this morning. Maybe that would be a good moment to have another one. But we would like also to see from which angle and where we should be concentrating the presentations to avoid a repetition also of the same issues. So if you have suggestions, do not hesitate in contacting us. Send us your views, your proposals, and we will be happy in trying to take them. There were also questions. There were also questions about when you may have your say and when you can intervene. Of course, after this session today, you can send us your questions that will help us to finalize the Q&A that we mentioned before, the frequently asked questions. But also you can send us your suggestions about the different implementing delegated acts that will be coming from now until the end of the transitional period. But more importantly, as you know, and it's customary in the Commission, when we will be about to adopt an implementing act, we will of course publish for some sort of short public consultation, so there will be the possibility for everyone to react to every implementing act. We provided an estimated timeline, and it was Theo before who presented the calendar and the timeline. I have to say that there's a risk, of course, that everything slips into the next quarter, and even that some of them may be grouped and come together. We are still discussing, and I think that's something that we will need to see also with the next commissioner, and the next commissioner possibly in September. In any case, no implementing acts will be published or submitted for public opinion before the summer. The sooner will be September, and still to be seen. But what I can say is stay tuned in with our website, because we will put there the information when the implementing acts will be up to consultation. And Alina?
Yes, so they're asking about there's a question that wants to clarify whether ammonia that is not used for fertilizers, whether it's subject to CBAM. And I just want to clarify this point, because yes, indeed, goods are subject to CBAM based on their common nomenclature code, not based on their final use. So this is in line with our frequently asked questions, and we apologize if there was a misunderstanding in our presentation, but indeed, it doesn't matter whether the ammonia will be used for fertilizers or for another use, it is still subject to CBAM.
I can clarify there, that's correct. What I can clarify is that the reason was because most of the ammonia imported is used for the production of fertilizers. I know that there are other ideas for importing ammonia for other different objectives, not necessarily linked to goods for the CBAM. This will be increasing, of course, in the future, and that's something that we will need to analyze. For example, if you're an expert in cement and you know that there is this question about what happens with non-calcined clay used, for example, for the ceramic sector, but not for the construction sector, not for the clinker or for the cement. That's something that we are trying to also to clarify, maybe by having different tariff numbers. But that's why there is a clear use of a specific good, which now falls under a CN code, which corresponds to a CBAM good, and that normally should not be there, unless, of course, ceramics one day will be introduced also into the scope of the CBAM. But of course, again, yes, you need to declare all ammonia, whether used or not for the production of fertilizers, because what you need to look at is at the list of CN codes in Annex 1. So I invite you to check the list of CN codes. And of course, if you have suggestions, I mentioned the example of the non-calcined clays for the ceramics, but if you have suggestions for other goods which are very much used for other different purposes, and where there could be a good reason for some sort of differentiation, just let us know.
There's another question on the guidance documents for third country producers, and indeed we have prepared guidance documents explaining how to use our methodology to report emissions and facilitate the exchange of information between the EU importer and the foreign producer. So those are available on our website. We provided the link. And then there was a question about how to become an authorized CBAM declarant or applicant. This was explained by my colleague Theo, but we're currently working on the implementing act to define the rules for how to be an authorized CBAM declarant. And we hope to have it running by the beginning of the definitive period from 2026 onwards.
Indeed, I mean, the conditions to become CBAM declarant are already in the CBAM regulations, so you can check the financial conditions in particular, so you can get ready for that. You can start preparing the data or the documents which are necessary to get the authorization. But that's one of the modules that we want to make it run as soon as possible at the beginning of next year, to have sufficient time in 2025 to allow everyone to get the status of a CBAM declarant. As you know, and that's important, I would like to underline, in order to import the CBAM goods, the only restriction, the only requirement is that the importer or the customs indirect customs representative has to be a CBAM declarant. And this is why it's necessary to go through the procedure. And this will be done through the NCAs in the country of establishment, irrespective of in how many member states you will be importing CBAM goods. Great.
I think we can finalize the session. Yep. We should probably thank all of you for participating and all your questions. We apologize we cannot answer all of them, but as Vicente said, we had over 5,000 people in the session, so we received many questions, but they will feed into our update of the frequently asked questions document. So we thank you for that, and I'll let David and Vicente wrap up.
Yeah, what I can say very quickly is that, of course, we are going to to check all your questions carefully. I hope that we answer the more general ones, but also some specific ones as much as we could in order to bring you closer to the implementation with the CBAM. That was the objective with the session of today. So I hope you found it interesting, but of course your feedback will be very useful for us in order to better prepare for next webinars. And as I said, send us ideas of what you would like to discuss in a webinar, where we should concentrate our participation in order to make a better use of your time and of our knowledge at the same time. And again, thank you to all of you. Thanks for your patience, for being there even after the link dropped. And I can see that there is a lot of interest in this type of webinars. So we are very happy with that, and we are there to help you. So David.
Yes, from my side, just to confirm to online participants that we will follow up with the PowerPoint presentation today. And I think it would be useful also to follow up right afterwards with an info pack, because you have been requesting information on very specific topics. So I believe the best thing to do would be to do an info pack and provide direct links to specific CBAM goods and webinars and information for you, including the frequently asked questions. That would be all. To thank the European Commission representatives, to thank you all. You can send, as Vicente mentioned, your suggestions by replying to the CBAM campaign email address. We'll be happy to stay in touch with you, and we will also inform you as soon as a new info session will be confirmed.
I would like to thank my colleagues for helping with the preparation of this webinar and participating in this webinar in particular. And thanks again to all of you, and see you next time.